right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Trading, Learning, and Development community. Thanks for joining us today. Let's see who we've got in. We've got Ken is here. Lisa, hey, Lisa. Zenu, thanks for joining us. Today, we are talking about a really interesting topic. It's something that it sort of stands out for me because I work as kind of a media producer in L&D, and I think that I sort of have the same sort of outlook on e-learning and organizations, like very similar to the way that Danny looks at it. And so when I saw Danny's article on LinkedIn, which I've linked in the chat, it really stood out. And it's one of those things, Danny, I saw when you had posted it, but then I'm like, okay, I got to respond to this. I have to say something. I wanted to comment on it, but then I just kept on pulling it up and couldn't figure out what to say. And so finally I was like, I'm just going to reach out and let's do it.
The pressure was on. Performance anxiety.
Exactly. So yeah, we're going to be talking about e-learning in today's disrupted workforce, which I know this isn't something that is typically like for a lot of the instructional designers and LXDs that we have coming through TLDC on a regular basis. I know that, talking about tools or specific skill sets is really important, career, all that, but this is important stuff. And Danny, I really appreciate you coming on today and talking about, this article that you wrote. And I'm going to just sort of start out and ask you, like, why exactly, what prompted you to write this article? What were you seeing out there that sort of motivated you to actually put, pen to paper or fingers to keyboard?
Well, thanks, Luis. I appreciate your feedback and that you were interested in the article. I think what I've seen, and my perspective has always been, kind of looking at the bigger picture and what's driving learning and what's driving performance and how do business leaders see learning and development. And that's changed so much over the years. And then I think this last 2 years of the pandemic, it's been a huge impact, not only to learning and development, but to the whole world. And you start to see, I think the first year of the pandemic, I think everybody was a bit in shock, like what's happening to this, this is going to go away soon. And we're kind of in denial. And then when it started happening, all of a sudden people were not going into their offices, or people were working remotely that had never worked remotely before, or just, the employee dissatisfaction that was there and that was amplified. It's something that I always thought about, because when you look at the e-learning world, it's something that's has a multiplicative effect. You can create your content or develop a learning thing, and you could put it out to thousands of people literally in seconds, right? Which is good and bad. If you do a good job, it's great. If you do a bad job, everybody's going to know.
Right.
But what I noticed is that how people worked and how people were learning was changing. And one of the best indicators for that was the articles I was seeing and the stories and the things that people were sharing in my network. So I would see things on LinkedIn. I would see things on the Learning Guild. Then I would start seeing things on like Forbes and Inc. and like business, business articles that are saying that the workforce is changing, and how people work and where people work is really disruptive. And there was a kind of a push-pull going on. My wife was the head of HR for a huge HR company for a very long time, was well networked with other HR folks. And a lot of the folks who were in the leadership position were just thinking, this is going to go away. We need to get our people back in the office. And you guys in HR, you got to figure out a solution to get people back in the office or else. And I think there was a bit of a denial in terms of what's happening and how significant this is. And interestingly enough, I think the stories that I've read, I think I read one in the Learning Solutions and maybe even in LinkedIn, is that the employee dissatisfaction has always existed, but the pandemic has just amplified it. So people are working from home more. They're remote. They're by themselves, or maybe in small groups, and they're thinking, life is too short. I need to figure out a better way to do my job or build a career. And maybe it's not necessarily working at corporate, XYZ, and maybe that career path is not for me. And I think prior to that, people were just, you're going through, whether it was a matrix organization or a vertical organization, you're going through, you're checking off the boxes, figuring out how I can get on to the next level. And I think with the pandemic and the way that the workforce has responded, that just kind of gotten disrupted, to lack of a better phrase. And
Right.
it's disrupted learning. It's put extra pressure, I think, on learning development folks and business leaders, because I think in many ways it used to be that working in online learning, developing online learning, it was something that's like, yeah, you guys have to do it. We're going to accept, we're business leaders. We'll accept that you have to do it, right? We prefer people to be face-to-face. We'll accept it. But then when you have people working remotely for the last 2 years, and people working on mobile devices, and people calling in on Zooms, and content has to be delivered in different modalities, execs and business leaders who basically hold the purse strings, they're paying attention, and the expectation levels are rising. So even though, back in the bad old days, when I would be developing content or working on teams and no one paid attention to me, I wouldn't get any budget. It would just be, if I just had that opportunity. And all of a sudden, now that opportunity is here and people are paying attention, who have wield a lot of influence and power, and they're going to make sure that what we're developing meets the performance needs of their employees or their staff. And if it doesn't, there will be consequences. And for lack of a better phrase, they'll notice, and they're going to let you know that you're not meeting the mark. It's no longer, I have a sales team, or I have a marketing team, or I have a technology team that needs to be trained on XYZ, sales techniques or technology or whatever. Go build a course for me, or go find a third party to put that together, and then we'll call you when we need you, right? When the old fear of a lot of learning development people is, I don't want to be an order taker, but that's kind of the role that some people fell into. Well, now with, the change in how people work, and the disruption, and where we are, and the amount of the levels, I guess, of exposure and visibility, we're all up there. We're all kind of getting a seat at the table.
Right.
And over my career, I've been fortunate enough to work in small enough organizations, or progressive enough organizations, not politically, but just organizationally, that said, Danny, we're going to trust you to do the right thing, kind of theory. Why? We need you to help us solve this solution, but you need to prove that you can do it, and you need to make sure you know who we are and what we do in our business. You can't just create some one-off and then walk away. And that was a very long-winded answer, but I think things have changed, and the visibility and the expectations have risen. And if you talk to people that I've talked to, founders or senior level executives, they're more focused on how can you help my people do their jobs better? What can you help bring to the table, and how can we partner to make that happen? They're not so much concerned about the technology or the methodology or the graphics or the video or how sophisticated it is, which are all good things. They're really focused on, because they're already really busy, and then you throw in the pandemic, and they're really busy. They're crazy busy. So they're going to sort things out, because that's what they've been trained to do in MBA school or wherever. This is what I can solve today. I'll put the other stuff on the back burner. If you can't help me solve my problem, I'm going to find a different solution somewhere else. I'll just drop it.
Right. So is it safe to say that L&D, the role of the L&D professional, should be kind of pushed up a little more, like within the organization, because of all this disruption that's going on? Is it more important now than ever that your e-learning professionals are should be more relied on within the organization?
I think it is. I think willingly or unwillingly, you're going to get pulled in that direction. It's and I can think back to when I worked with some clinical pharmacists. Could we talk about pharmacists for a brief second? And they're extremely bright people. They're very well educated. And in the specialty pharmacy world, they focus on patients. And these are not life and death situations necessarily, but they were very serious situations. They're not passing out pills. They're infusing people with drugs over a long-term period of time. And when they asked me for help in building them a professional development learning tool. It was like, okay, go back to your desk, create a plan, and come talk to me and show me that that's going to work, because they're working on empirical data all the time. And they're going to be able to say in their world, this stuff adds up, and I know that's going to lead me to a solution for my patient. And they viewed me as a learning person the same way. You have to show that what you have, your data adds up, and it's going to help my pharmacists, my nurses, my pharmacy techs do their jobs, get certified to a third party body, and make sure that they get the training needs that they need, that they can count on, and that they can replicate. They could actually print out a certificate and go to any company in the pharmacy world and say, look, I got this, and it's certified through a third party. And I was pulled to the table, right? kind of, back then. And that was because of the way the organization was structured, was relatively flat, a lot of pressure, a lot, you're dealing with patients' lives. And, the parallel to me is that the pandemic has really changed the way people work. It's flattened out a lot of people's roles. You have to deliver, and you have to recognize that people are paying attention to you. Senior execs are paying attention to you. And it's not just go develop your course, in Camtasia or Storyline or somewhere else, and then come back and then we'll see what people say. It's more like, how are you going to improve my people's performance, and what can you bring to the table? And I think what I wrote about in the article is how do we as learning development people communicate that in the language that they can understand? I mean, these are wonderful tools. There's wonderful methodologies, but you can't come to the table and speak in that vernacular. You have to speak in what, for lack of a better phrase, in business terms, in terms that they'll understand, in terms of performance, that sort of thing.
That is so important. Just because it seems like your typical e-learning professional, and maybe one of the reasons why, for instance, with this particular broadcast, we don't have a ton of registrations in, is because a lot of this is just being able to start discussing strategy, right? Yeah. And that's not typically someone like, I know like Lisa Crockett is in, and Lisa Crockett is strategic. I know, Danny, that you're strategic. I've always sort of looked at you as somebody who, like, when you are consulting, you sort of go into an organization looking at the organization holistically first, and then, diving into a project, but that's not typical.
True.
And I think it is really, really important for folks to start looking at things that way, because this is important stuff. And I don't know, like, we used to talk about disruption as almost like it was potentially a good marketing thing. Like, this app is going to disrupt this, right, and this is going to disrupt that. Right. This disruption is something that has absolutely been kind of like this avalanche of change that yes. is impacting us in a variety of ways, not just economically, but socially, and technology is shifting altogether to accommodate all of these things. So there is a lot going on right now. But what are you seeing that is getting disrupted, like specifically out there, like if for e-learning professionals? Is there anything like that people should be particularly aware of, that off the top of your head that you can think of that maybe some of the folks listening should keep in mind?
Okay, well, let me just preface this with saying I know it's hard to get a seat at the table and be strategic. Not everyone gets that opportunity. Mm-hmm. So I've been fortunate, and I've been lucky in the chances that I have. So I recognize that. But I will say also that going forward into the near term and long term, I think there will be more opportunities for that, because there's just too much pressure. Mm-hmm. So I think what things some people can take away. I don't know if you read the LinkedIn report, and to reference my paper, it was called Workplace Learning LinkedIn Transformation of L&D. And if you look that up, and I'll send it to you later.
Yeah,
it's a fantastic report of L&D across the world. Mm-hmm. And it documents kind of what happened pre-pandemic and what's happening now. And some of the things they talk about are that a lot of execs, even in the tech sector, are not very digitally savvy. And at the same time, the projection from Coursera, so maybe take with a grain of salt, that the next 3 to 4 years is going to be 149 million new jobs that are technology or digitally focused. So if you have your execs who are already stressed more by the pandemic, probably less digitally savvy than they could be even in the tech world, because the demands for them as managers and leaders are really strong. And then you have all these new jobs coming on all these digital skills that have to get improved and amplified. How are we going to do that, right? And I don't think there's an easy solution to that. But I do think by building a partnership and getting to know what leaders are going through, what their challenges are, and And to me, it's more of kind of, I think you mentioned before, this holistic partnership that you are a partner, whether you're at the table or not, you're a partner with your customers to help them figure out how to improve the efficiencies of their staff or themselves. Because I think that's twofold. There's always going to be a need for their staff to be trained or improve their performance. That's not going away. I think the other thing that's happening is that because of the disruption in the workforce, there's more pressure on these executives to deliver. They have to deliver more. They have to be more digitally savvy because technology is basically, I tell my kids, technology is eating everything. So it's everywhere and it changes really fast. So not only do these execs have the traditional, how do I manage, my P&E or my people or my projections of my budget, is how do I figure out how to get my people trained up on the technology that's coming down the pike or the stuff that they're using on, and can I do it? And what challenges will that entail? And so I think what I perceive from a lot of the stories, there's tons of stories that are popping up on LinkedIn. If you go on LinkedIn after the call, just go through, you'll see more and more stories about everything's changing, and L&D folks are going to have to get up to snuff because the world has changed. So I don't know that, it's going to be anything less than dynamic, and it's going to be dynamic for a long period of time. I don't see it going away. I see these pressures on execs to continually increase. And I think they're going to look for e-learning leaders to help them develop solutions. And you can't do it in a silo. You can't do it in a one-off. It has to be a partnership, because it has to be, to steal a term from the Agile, it has to be iterative. You're going to have to try things out, build betas, try them out, see how things work, come back and fix it again and do it over and over again, kind of like you do in the technology world. But you're going to have to do it in a way that the execs know what you're talking about. Because let's be honest, a lot of the execs aren't looking at the granular level of how you develop content.
Right. I can tell you, I work for an online learning platform, huge one. Our organization and the competitors are doing better than they've ever done. And we're delivering thousands of courses on a regular basis. And, revenue has never been this good. It's absolutely incredible. Wow. And I think that it is really important for people to start, the willingness to adapt is going to be, I think a key thing over the next few years, just because, like you're saying, it is a really, really dynamic situation at this point. And we've all got to, if you want to be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to be handed to you within this space, that adaptability is going to be key. That's just my opinion anyway.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think you have to be willing to take a calculated risk. You have to, and in order to get to that point, you're going to have to reach out and try to, develop relationships with people that perhaps you hadn't had relationships with them in the past. Yeah. I think one of the things that, I've talked with some of the people that I know, because my background a million years ago was in technology. Early on, the technology people lived in the data center, right? It's kind of lost in the data center, and the rest of the business was wherever it was, customer facing or in the office. But over the years, technology has shifted into part of how everybody does their jobs. So the traditional IT person had nowhere to hide. So what happened was IT people is either you got to move up, you got to deliver, you got to interact with people, you have to have conversations, you have to develop relationships, you have to develop skills. And I think I see that in a very much smaller version in the L&D world. And it's not to criticize the L&D people and online learning people, because there are a lot of tools out there that weren't there a few years ago. They're more sophisticated. It takes a lot of time to learn them. And then 12 to 18 months, it's going to shift because somebody else is going to be out with a different platform, a different tool, a different take on that. And so we're spending our time trying to figure out how to make these things work efficiently as possible. But our customers or our performance leaders are saying, how can you make sure that my people get, the skills that they need? I'm not as interested in the tools that you're working on, but you still have to spend more time and energy, perhaps even more time and energy on your own time, learning these tools and learning what's important. And one of the clients I had, it was a huge school client, and they had millions of users, and we partnered, and it was a fantastic project. I worked with Nick Floro on. And one of the things the founder said to me is, all this stuff is great, Danny, but how can you help me make sure that the people that say they're going to try start these courses actually complete them?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you're absolutely right. I said, that has always been a challenge in the learning and development world. You can have the greatest thing since sliced bread. That doesn't mean people are going to engage in it, complete the work, or get to the objectives, or write the paper, or whatever it is they're supposed to do. And there's no easy solution for that. And I think then that gets amplified. And I think a lot of folks would say, oh, I spent all this, now we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and people aren't using the tool or not taking the training. It's all your fault. And e-learning and learning development people, why didn't you fix that? Why didn't you make that better? And I think you have to be able to develop a partnership to have kind of a more level playing field to have those conversations. Because let's be honest, people in the business side, they make mistakes all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sales and marketing campaigns fail all the time. Technology people bring out build tools, they fail all the time. So, L&D can't be perfect, and L&D folks can't have the perfect solution out there. They have to have an effective solution. But I think if you can humanize your relationship with them, you're more than willing. I think you're more likely to get a break to say, you're partnering with us. We're trying to solve this problem together.
Right. Nice. Yeah. Lisa's saying it's all about strategy, culture, and especially climate.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Lisa. I'm just going to real quick plug for the eLearning Tool Summit, which is coming up in a couple weeks. 12 tools, 12 speakers. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to do something with just a bunch of different tools, just because I feel like there's just so much out there that just having a general understanding of a lot of different things can actually be kind of helpful nowadays. So you can sit in a Captivate session, Articulate Rise session, which Lisa's going to be doing. And, even PowerPoint, we have a bunch of tools featured in that particular event. So that's coming up in a couple weeks. Now, in your article, Danny, you had talked about what people can focus on.
Yeah.
Why don't you just go over that a little bit? Let's
okay.
sort of just chat about that.
Let me just take a quick look at what I said.
And I had the article posted in the beginning of chat, but
right. No. I think, I talked about this, and I'm not the first person to talk about it, that it's more than a tool or the tools or the methodology. And it's more than course completions. It's about improving or targeting key business skills of your customers or your client or your users. It's what have they, it's kind of like the old idea of needs assessment. It's like, where are they now? What are they able to do? And what will this training improve and to what level? And that's where the focus is on. The focus should be on performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to have that conversation about what performance are we trying to improve. And I think in earlier presentations, I've talked about, as an e-learning person and developing relationships, it's about what is the learning challenge, right? Are we focused on the learning challenge? Because that's the important thing. That's where the rubber meets the road. And I think with all the disruption, with all the tools, with all the things that's going on, it's really sometimes hard to kind of narrow down and focus on what the learning challenge is and how are you going to measure that performance has improved, right? By the tools that we've provided. And when it hasn't improved, and if you have that partnership and you have this kind of iterative approach, you can go back and revisit it and make adjustments and then continue to improve it. And I think that's important. It can't be the one-off, here's your course, throw it over the wall, take it and we'll see you at the next project. It has to be kind of a career life, a career or life cycle where wherever you are, you develop a relationship with these people and you maintain it. And that's kind of hard, and it's hard to do. I'm not saying it's easy to do. I think at smaller organizations, it's much easier. In large organizations, it's much more difficult because of the bureaucracy that's built in there. So the partnership thing is important. I also think because of the number of tools that are out there and the technology that's inherent in using those tools, we have to be really better at communicating why a set of tools or why a methodology is important to the business leaders. Because they're juggling a lot of balls in the air, and they need to understand in the language that makes sense to them why you're promoting a particular solution. If I go back to like my clinical pharmacy people, I needed to show them quantifiable data why investing in this type of platform that we were going to develop totally custom was a worthwhile effort, because it would get them the continuing education certification they needed for the pharmacists, for the pharmacy techs, for the nurses. And it's something that's it's mobile, it's transferable. So there's a value added that it was able to show to them. And that takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. But I think we're, like it or not, we're more closely wedded together because the things I said earlier, which is the pandemic has changed how people have worked, and execs and people with hold purse strings are paying attention to what's going on online. You know, it's not just Zoom, it's not just people in the office. They're paying attention. So it's important for us to develop a cogent idea and show that you can back it up with actual performance improvement. And then probably the last thing, you know, I think last two things, and I've talked about this before, is getting to know our organizations. And I talked about a couple of the models I use in the organizational development world is you have to learn about the people, the process, the business practices of your customers or your clients. You can't just show up with a canned solution. You have to learn what they do and how they do their jobs, and have conversations and have interviews and get feedback, and maybe hopefully get enlightened in how they do their work, and even be able to have that crucial conversation with the leader who said to you, Danny, I need you to go talk to my team, my sales team, and here they're going to tell you exactly what you need, and here's what they're going to tell you. And then they tell you something completely different. And you go back to your leader and say, hey, Joe, this is what they're telling me. It totally contradicts what you're saying. So you have to have that kind of relationship where you can figure out, well, what are you going to really focus on? What's really important and what's going to help improve their performance? And you can't just be an order taker, and you can't just dictate it. So what does that leave? That leaves you building a relationship to kind of parse through that information to see what's viable and what's going to work. And the only way you're going to get there is trying to learn what they're all about. You can't just kind of show up with a prescriptive way. And then the last thing to me, and you'd mentioned it, is culture and change, because everybody has gone through massive change over the last 2 years, not only within your organizations, but in our world and our lives. And the change management aspect of business, of learning development, is huge, and it's not going away. Mm-hmm. And we need to recognize that everybody's going to, I talked about this before, there's a change curve. It's kind of like up and then goes down and then back up again. And we're all kind of in these different dynamic places of change where people are feeling like, oh my God, this is awful, I'll never survive. The dropping down to all these changes that are happening, and they're never going to get out of what they call the pit, to thinking, maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe I can figure out a way to work from home or work remotely, or maybe come in a couple of days from work, or maybe I can take this online learning and learn something that's going to reflect my performance. And then they start slipping back again. Oh my God, everything's horrible again. But then eventually they get out of it. And so there's this kind of idea that this change is this dynamic curve that we're all going to be going through, but we're all going to be at different stages of that change. Mm-hmm. We're all going to be at different places of saying, I'm all in for this change, or I hate this change, I'm never going to buy in, or I'm kind of in, I'm kind of in between. I'm kind of neutral. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. And that's a natural thing for people to deal with. I know perhaps in our performative world, when we go to a job, we pretend like, everything's good and we got it all figured out, but deep inside, we have our own humanity, right? And recognizing that everybody goes through that, I think, is really, really important in dealing with change. And it happens at the individual level, and it happens at the organizational level. And then I think it's amplified by the disruptions that we had over the last 2 years.
Right. And it feels like too, at the organizational level, you have to keep in mind too, that it's not just L&D that's being disrupted, but, IT is being disrupted, yep. Marketing, sales, all of it is changing around. Do you think that there are fluctuations in relationship to these different departments? Is there anything that might be significantly changing between L&D and another, I guess, stakeholder in the organization?
I think what's going to happen, and again, I would highly recommend the LinkedIn report, and I'll send it to you, is that the budget levels that learning development leaders are projecting are not, I wouldn't say going through the roof, but are significantly larger than they were over the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. So expectation is there's more performance to be addressed, to be improved, mm-hmm. And that you're going to have more leeway to make that happen as a learning development people, but you're also going to have to be more responsible and accountable to the people who hold those purse strings.
Yeah.
That's, to the old adage, of much, what is that? Something about, I can't remember what the adage is. Much is expected to those who have a lot of power, some idea like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to have to be able to deliver because much will be expected of you, because
Mm-hmm.
now you have the tools, now you have the budget, now you have the manpower, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
to make it happen. And I think the kind of dark side of that, because you have to develop this relationship, the dark side is there are some executives that the two things that are happening that I hear from people in HR. One is if people don't come back to work, they're going to punish them. That's just kind of what they believe, is that you need face time or your career path is going to suffer. And that to me is just unbelievably bad, unbelievably negative. And I think employees aren't stupid, because people are kind of fed up because of dissatisfaction there, people will go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So if you're not helping improve people's performance and then you're putting pressure on people to come into a workplace that maybe they don't want to be in, then I think it's that disruption is going to be there for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing is that the demand on digital skills is huge. It's impacting not only the employees, but it's impacting leaders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it feels like just having the ability to understand certain things it is just really, really important at this point. Like just being able to have some knowledge of a little bit of everything could be really, really advantageous. And, and I do think that I wish that there was some concrete way of being able to like come out with a theme within this community where we can, help support each other so that we can talk about taking advantage of these opportunities that have been handed to us to be able to help more people and potentially help, support our careers. But I don't even know exactly how to formulate that, because it is really kind of more of an adaptability thing and coming up with ways to just continue to morph into what's needed next. But if you have any ideas about that in the future, Danny, let me know, because I would love to be able to bring that to the forefront of this community, because I do think it's super important.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think you're already doing it with the TLDC podcast, because one of the things I noticed with one of the clients I worked with, they worked with schools and school teachers. And one of the concepts I learned, I think I'd forgotten really, is the idea of professional development, where teachers met, and sometimes on their own time, but they met and taught each other or learned from each other on what's working, what's not working, what methodology, what pedagogy, maybe not just tools, what teaching techniques do they are really good at, or what teaching techniques they need to get better at, or what management techniques. And they share that information in kind of an informal organization, and sometimes formal because the school or district is dictating it. But I do think things like TLDC, where you're bringing in a diverse group of people to share information, is a really important part of that. And then, in my old days working in a big financial services institution, you would have people meeting at lunchtime, people meeting for coffee, people meeting after work to go to professional development networking things. They didn't really call it that at the time, but that's what they were doing. And I think that's important.
Okay. I'm going to consider that, because it's just, being able to find the resources to be able to produce stuff like that, because I do think it's important. And like Lisa's saying in chat, like rounds, which kind of reminds me of, of course, because being a songwriter, we used to do songwriter rounds in different groups that I was in, and we would just share feedback and, and do our performance. And absolutely, this would be, that would be really, really helpful for folks.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you probably trusted each other to be vulnerable and have that conversation, right? And performance, right? Which is hard. It's not easy.
It's true. And people would definitely benefit from it. Yeah. This is good. Well, Danny, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you so much for taking the time for doing this. This has been
Thank you so much.
super
I always
valuable.
enjoy my time on TLDC.
Absolutely. And anytime you have anything you want to talk about, just hit me up. I love having you on the broadcast, and I'm sure everyone is just benefiting from your words of wisdom.
Well,
So
thanks.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. And don't forget to send me that link. Okay.
I will.
All right. Take care. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And let's see, next week, I think we have one member showcase scheduled, and I want to start doing a little bit more. I've been a little under the weather lately for the last couple of weeks, but we'll get back into it. And we've got the eLearning Tool Summit at the end of the month, so don't miss that. And with that, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks, everyone.
All right, be
Bye.
healthy.